She dedicated her entire life to her son, never imagining she would one day be seen as an obstacle. Now, aging in isolation, she discovers that the family legacy is being corrupted from within. But an old ally returns in silence, and together they decide to confront the betrayal with evidence and courage. What begins as a luxurious trip on the open sea turns into a confrontation where the truth may sink or rise forever. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The wind blew softly across Chesapeake Bay that October morning, carrying the salty scent of the sea that Helen Cavendish knew so well. Sitting on the veranda of her Georgetown mansion, she watched the ships in the distance, feeling a pang in her chest as she recognized one of the cargo vessels bearing the family name emblazoned on its hull, Cavendish Marine Engineering. 45 years of history, built brick by brick, project by project alongside her late husband Albert. Now, at 75, Helen felt like a stranger in her own home. The corridors that once echoed with laughter from parties and family gatherings remained silent, almost sepulchral. The three-story mansion, with its impeccable gardens and privileged view, seemed too large for one woman, too large and too empty. Felicity, her caregiver, entered the veranda carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. She was a woman in her early 40s, with brown hair tied in a discreet bun, an attentive gaze and precise movements. There was something about her that inspired confidence, a solidity that Helen found in no one else. "Good morning, Mrs. Cavendish. I've brought your chamomile tea, just as you like it." Helen smiled weakly, accepting the cup with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you, dear. I don't know what I'd do without you." Felicity adjusted the shawl on the elderly woman's shoulders and sat beside her, a gesture of intimacy that Helen only allowed that woman. In the past 2 years, since Felicity had arrived at the mansion, the two had developed a relationship that went beyond professional. They were confidants, silent allies in a world that seemed to conspire against Helen. "Robert called earlier," Felicity commented, with care in her voice. "He said he won't be coming for Sunday lunch. Urgent company matters." Helen sighed, unsurprised. Robert always had urgent company matters. Her only son, now 48, had become a polite stranger who visited out of obligation, not affection. Ever since he married Deborah 5 years ago, the abyss between mother and son had only deepened. Deborah Blackwood. The name alone brought a bitter taste to Helen's mouth. Beautiful, elegant, with a degree in business administration from a European university. Her daughter-in-law was everything Washingtonian society admired. At social events she smiled perfectly, held Robert's arm with theatrical devotion, spoke about charity and culture with calculated eloquence. But Helen saw beyond the mask. She saw the cold glances when Deborah thought no one was watching. She saw the way she manipulated conversations to exclude her mother-in-law from family decisions. She saw how she isolated Robert from any influence other than her own. "You ate little at breakfast," Felicity observed, bringing Helen back to the present. "You need to eat better." "I don't have much appetite lately." Helen paused, looking at the sea. "You know, Felicity, sometimes I wonder where I went wrong. I dedicated my entire life to Robert. When Albert started building the company, I was by his side in every decision, in every project. But I never let that interfere with my dedication to our son. I went to all his school presentations, all his soccer games, took care of him when he was sick, advised him when he needed it. And now he's lost," Felicity completed, with a softness that didn't sound condescending. "But not because of you." Helen looked at her caregiver, noticing something in her tone of voice that caught her attention. "You speak with such certainty." Felicity hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much she should reveal. "It's just that I know well how manipulation works, Mrs. Cavendish. I've seen good people alienated from those they love by toxic influences." There was a story there, Helen perceived, but she didn't press. Everyone carried their ghosts. She herself carried many. Helen's phone vibrated on the small table beside her. A message from Robert, short, formal, confirming he wouldn't come on Sunday and suggesting she take the opportunity to rest. As if her entire life wasn't an endless forced rest, an unchosen retirement from everything that mattered. After Albert passed away 3 years ago, Helen discovered that the will she knew, the one they had carefully drafted together, seemed different. Small things, subtleties that perhaps only she would notice. Clauses about a supervisory board that would ensure the company maintained its ethical values, social projects that should be financed with part of the profits. All this had simply disappeared from the final version. At the time, still in deep mourning, she didn't have the strength to question it. Robert took over with Deborah by his side, and Helen found herself gradually pushed away from everything. In recent months, however, strange things had started to happen. Medicines she didn't recognize appeared on her nightstand, always with a pharmacy label and a note from Deborah saying they were vitamins recommended by a doctor. Documents she kept in her personal office mysteriously vanished. Bank statements showed movements she hadn't authorized, small amounts that might go unnoticed by less attentive eyes. Helen was no fool. She knew something was happening, and she knew Felicity noticed it too. "I need to tell you something," Felicity said suddenly, interrupting the silence that had settled between them. "But you need to promise you'll listen to me until the end." Helen straightened in her chair, her heart accelerating. "Go ahead." Felicity took a deep breath. "My full name is Felicity Stone, formerly Felicity Rocha Santos. 6 years ago, I was a marine engineer at Cavendish. I worked there for 8 years, ever since I graduated. It was a dream come true to work for a company with your family's reputation." Helen's eyes widened. "You worked for the company? Why did you never tell me?" "Because I was fired under circumstances. That embarrassed me. I was accused of disloyalty, of spreading false rumors about financial irregularities. In reality, I had discovered diversions, overbilled contracts, payments to phantom suppliers. I took my findings to the board of directors, believing I was doing the right thing. 2 weeks later, I was fired for just cause. My reputation was destroyed. No one in the marine industry wanted to hire me." "Did Robert know about this?" Felicity shook her head. "At the time, your son was still learning the business. The one who orchestrated my dismissal was the former financial director, a man named Augustus Maxwell. He retired shortly after with a generous severance package. Very generous, I must say." Helen felt her head spin. "And you're here now because when I saw the advertisement looking for a caregiver for you 2 years ago, I saw an opportunity. Not for revenge, Mrs. Cavendish, but to do what's right. I used my maiden name, Felicity Rocha, so that no one would make the connection with Felicity Rocha Santos, the dismissed engineer. And ever since I arrived here, I've been observing. And what I see worries me greatly." "What do you see?" "I see a pattern. The same irregularities I reported 6 years ago are still happening, only now in a more sophisticated way. And I see you being isolated, unnecessarily medicated, having your documents manipulated. Mrs. Cavendish, with all due respect, I think they are trying to declare you legally incapacitated." The words fell like stones in Helen's stomach. She had always suspected, but hearing it aloud made everything terrifying and real. "Deborah," Helen whispered. Felicity nodded. "I'm almost certain. She controls everything around Robert. She controls his schedule, the information that reaches him, the people he meets. Your son is a good man, Mrs. Cavendish, but he's being manipulated by someone very clever. What can we do?" Felicity pulled a chair closer. "We need concrete evidence. We need to show Robert the truth in a way he cannot ignore, or that Deborah cannot distort. And we need to do it quickly before it's too late." Helen looked at her own hands, marked by time but still firm. She thought of Albert, of everything they had built together. She thought of the legacy that was being corroded by greed and ambition. She thought of Robert, her boy, now a man blinded by a love that didn't see the trap he was caught in. "Then let's begin," Helen said, with a determination she hadn't felt in years. "Let's reclaim my family and my company. Tell me what you need me to do." Felicity smiled, and for the first time, Helen saw not just a caregiver, but an ally, a warrior who had chosen to fight by her side. "First, we need to document everything. Every strange medication, every missing document, every suspicious bank transaction. I have contacts from my engineering days. people who still believe in me and who can help us discreetly. There's an old company advisor, Dr. Marcus Ellis, who worked with your husband from the beginning. He never took well to your removal from the board after Mr. Albert's passing. Helen remembered Marcus well, a man of integrity, with solid principles. Yes, we can trust him. The sun climbed high in the Washington, D.C. sky, illuminating the bay with golden hues. Helen felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. It wouldn't be easy. It would probably be the hardest battle of her life. But she was no longer alone, and as long as there was breath in her body, she would fight for what was right. The two women spent the rest of the morning planning. Felicity revealed that she had already been discreetly photographing documents and recording inconsistencies. She had a preliminary dossier that would make any investigator pay attention. Helen, in turn, remembered that she had access to safes and files that Deborah didn't know about, places where Albert kept copies of important documents. When afternoon arrived, Helen felt tired but renewed. There was a path ahead, tortuous, uncertain, but a path, and she would follow it to the end. The following week unfolded at a pace of apparent normalcy. Helen maintained her usual routine, morning walks in the garden, reading in the library, teas on the veranda, but beneath the calm surface, a silent investigation was taking shape. Felicity took advantage of every moment she went out for groceries or appointments to meet discreetly with Dr. Marcus Ellis. The former advisor, now 72, maintained a small consulting office in downtown Washington, D.C., where he still served a few select clients. When Felicity revealed her true identity and explained the situation, the man's eyes filled with a mixture of indignation and relief. "I knew something was wrong," Marcus said, leafing through the documents Felicity had brought. "When they removed me from the board, they claimed it was time for renewal, new blood. But I knew Albert since college. I know exactly what he wanted for the company, and this isn't it." "Can you help us?" Felicity asked. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his lined face showing determination. "I can, and I will. Helen Cavendish is one of the most honest people I know. If she needs help, count me in." Back at the mansion, Felicity found Helen in her personal office, a room on the second floor that rarely received visitors. There, surrounded by family photographs and company trophies, the matriarch examined old files she had retrieved from a safe hidden behind a bookshelf. "Look at this," Helen said when Felicity entered. "These are copies of the original contracts for some of the company's main projects over the last 5 years. Albert always made backup copies of everything important." She pointed to numbers highlighted in yellow. "These values don't match what was reported in the official balance sheets. There's a difference of millions of dollars." Felicity sat beside her, her engineering training allowing her to quickly identify the discrepancies. "It's systematic overbilling. The projects cost much less than declared. Someone is pocketing the difference." "And it happened mostly in the last 3 years," Helen observed, her voice trembling, "after Albert passed away." That night, while Helen rested, Felicity stayed awake organizing all the information they had collected. She created detailed spreadsheets, timelines, connections between events. The picture that emerged was disturbing. It wasn't just about financial diversions, but a calculated operation to completely take control of the company, eliminating any resistance or supervision. Felicity's phone vibrated. It was a message from a former engineering colleague, someone who still worked at Cavendish Marine. The text was brief and urgent. "Need to talk to you. It's about that old investigation. I found things." They arranged to meet the next day at a discreet cafe in Old Town Alexandria. Felicity arrived early, choosing a table in the back. Her ex-colleague Andrew Talbot appeared 15 minutes later, looking nervously around before sitting down. "Felicity," he began, keeping his voice low, "I never believed those accusations against you. I always knew you were too honest to make things up, so when the same problems you reported started to emerge, I began to investigate on my own." "And what did you find?" Andrew slid an envelope across the table, copies of emails, altered reports, records of secret meetings. "It all points to a coordinated scheme. The worst part is that Robert doesn't seem to be consciously involved. He signs things, approves projects, but always based on information that Deborah and the new financial director, a man named Paul Saltmarsh, present to him. Paul Saltmarsh, Felicity repeated. When did he join the company? Soon after Augustus Maxwell retired. He's Deborah's distant cousin. Felicity, I think they planned this a long time ago. Maybe even before she married Robert. The revelation was like a piece completing a macabre puzzle. Deborah wasn't just an opportunist who saw a chance after the marriage. She had infiltrated the Cavendish family with a long-term plan. There's more, Andrew continued, his expression grim. I heard rumors that they are preparing documents to question Mrs. Cavendish's mental capacity. There are appointments scheduled with psychiatrists, medical reports being prepared. If they manage to declare her incapacitated, full control of the company passes to Robert, and we know who really controls Robert. Felicity felt a chill run down her spine. We need to act fast. When she returned to the mansion, she found Helen agitated. The matriarch held a bottle of pills she had found on her nightstand. Felicity, I took these to a trusted pharmacist. Do you know what they are? Heavy anxiolytics, mixed with sedatives. If I were taking these regularly, as Deborah insists I should, I would be completely disoriented. It would be easy to declare me incapacitated. The two women exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation weighing on them. They weren't just dealing with embezzlement. They were facing an elaborate conspiracy to destroy Helen and take everything the Cavendish family had built. That night they met with Dr. Marcus Ellis via secure video call. The lawyer listened to everything with growing attention. What we have is serious, but we need more, he analyzed. We need something irrefutable, something Robert cannot ignore even under his wife's influence. And we need a moment when we can present all this without Deborah having a chance to interfere or distort the facts. Helen remained silent for a moment, thoughtful. An idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, but perhaps it was the only way. The yacht, she said suddenly. The Southern Star. The company yacht? Felicity asked. Helen nodded. Albert had it built 20 years ago. It's the pride of the company, used for important events and trips with VIP clients. I could invite Robert and Deborah for a cruise. It would be a way to attempt a reconciliation, something that would seem natural. Robert wouldn't refuse. It would be a very impolite gesture. And in an isolated environment, away from usual influences, he would really have to listen to you, Marcus completed, seeing where she was going. But it's risky, Felicity warned. If Deborah suspects anything, that's why it needs to seem completely genuine, Helen said. I'll say I'm feeling lonely, that I want to spend quality time with my son. It's the kind of emotional request that even Deborah would find difficult to refuse publicly without appearing cruel. In the following days, the plan was refined. Helen would extend the invitation casually during a phone call with Robert. She wouldn't mention confrontations or serious matters, only longing and the desire to relive old times. The yacht was large enough to be comfortable, but small enough that private conversations would be inevitable. Felicity suggested an additional security measure. I'll discreetly install some micro-cameras and audio recorders on the yacht, at strategic points. I have a trusted friend who works with electronic security. It won't be visible, but we'll have a record of everything that happens. Helen hesitated for a moment, uncomfortable with the idea of spying on her own son. But the reality was harsh. They were dealing with unscrupulous people, and they needed every possible safeguard. All right, she finally agreed, but I want everything delivered to Marcus, in a sealed envelope even before we embark. If something goes wrong, if something happens to me, the evidence needs to reach the correct authorities. Nothing will go wrong, Mrs. Cavendish, Felicity said with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. The call to Robert happened on a rainy October afternoon. Helen took a deep breath before dialing, mentally rehearsing the tone of voice she should use. Maternal but not desperate, nostalgic but not melancholic. Robert? Son? How are you? Her son's voice sounded surprised but polite. Mother, I'm fine. Sorry I didn't call earlier. It's been a busy week. I imagine. The company must be demanding a lot from you. Helen paused as if gathering courage. Robert, I know we've been distant lately. And I understand you have your responsibilities, your life, but I was thinking, the Southern Star has been sitting at the pier for months. How about a cruise? The three of us, you, me, and Deborah, like old times when your father was still with us." There was silence on the other end. Helen could imagine Robert processing the request, perhaps looking at Deborah, who was surely nearby. "Mother, I don't know if it's a good time." "Please, son." Helen allowed her voice to tremble slightly, genuinely. "I'm not asking for much. Just one day. A lunch. At sea, a few hours of quiet conversation. I miss you so much." Another silence, longer. Then Robert sighed. "All right, Mother. I'll check my schedule and we'll confirm a date, okay?" Helen smiled, relieved. "Thank you, my son. It means a lot to me." When she hung up, her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. The game was in motion. There was no turning back. Whatever happened on the Southern Star would define their future. Felicity entered the office, noticing Helen's expression. He accepted. He accepted. Helen looked out the window, at the bay, where soon a luxurious yacht would sail, carrying secrets, lies, and a last chance for redemption. Now we just need to prepare for whatever comes. The two women spent the following days in meticulous preparation. Felicity coordinated the installation of the recording equipment, personally testing each device. Dr. Marcus Ellis organized all the legal documentation, preparing formal complaints that could be activated if necessary. Helen, in turn, mentally rehearsed the conversation she needed to have with Robert, carefully choosing every word she would say. On the eve of the cruise, Felicity handed a thick envelope to Helen. Inside was a copy of all the evidence they had collected, organized clearly and irrefutably. "If something happens to me," Helen said, holding the envelope firmly, "you know what to do." "Nothing will happen, Mrs. Cavendish. I'll be at the pier the whole time. At the slightest sign of trouble, I'll alert the authorities." Helen hugged her caregiver, her ally, her friend. "Thank you, Felicity, for believing in me, for fighting by my side." "Always, Mrs. Cavendish, always." That night, Helen barely slept. Tomorrow everything would change, for better or for worse, but it would change, and she would be ready. The Southern Star gleamed under the morning sun when Helen arrived at the company pier. At 25 meters long, the yacht was a masterpiece of marine engineering, all mahogany and bronze fittings, representing the best Cavendish Marine could offer. Felicity accompanied her, carrying a small bag with Helen's personal belongings. The crew was reduced, as Helen had requested. Only Captain Smith, a trusted man who had worked with Albert for decades, and an auxiliary sailor. Fewer people meant fewer complications, fewer witnesses if things got tense. "Good morning, Mrs. Cavendish," Captain Smith greeted, extending his hand to help her board. "The yacht is prepared. We're going to have a beautiful day at sea." Helen smiled, but her heart beat fast. Felicity accompanied her to the main cabin, discreetly checking if all recording devices were working. A light touch on the watch Helen wore, a discreet wink. All set. "Remember," Felicity whispered, "I'll be monitoring everything from Dr. Ellis's office. Any problem, we're a call away." "I know." Helen squeezed her friend's hand. "See you tonight." Felicity disembarked just as a black car parked at the pier. Robert stepped out first, tall and elegant in his white dress shirt and beige trousers. He had his father's clear eyes and the gentle smile Helen loved so much. But it was the second figure emerging from the car that commanded attention. Deborah Blackwood, in her flowing floral dress, designer sunglasses, and perfectly styled blonde hair, was the image of Washingtonian sophistication. She smiled upon seeing her mother-in-law, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mother-in-law? What a wonderful surprise this invitation is," Deborah said, air-kissing Helen's cheeks. "I've been dying for a day at sea." Helen returned the greeting with studied politeness. "It's good you could come. Robert, my son, you look tired." Robert hugged his mother, and in that brief contact, Helen felt the distance that had settled between them. It was like hugging an acquaintance, not her son. "Work has been intense, Mother, but today is a day to relax." The yacht departed smoothly, gliding through the calm waters of Chesapeake Bay. The Statue of Liberty watched them from atop Liberty Island, and the Empire State Building rose majestically in the distance. Helen had always loved that view, her home city framed by the sea that had sustained her family for decades. Deborah settled on the upper deck, asking the sailor to bring champagne and snacks. Robert joined her, while Helen remained on the main deck observing. Captain Smith kept the yacht on a gentle course, moving away from the coast toward the open sea. Lunch was served in the main dining room, a table elegantly set with a linen tablecloth and porcelain dishes that had belonged to Helen's grandmother. Grilled shrimp, caprese salad, Sicilian lemon risotto. Deborah praised each dish with exaggerated enthusiasm, skillfully controlling the conversation, directing topics to superficial matters whenever Helen tried to bring up something more personal. "Robert, do you remember when you and your father used to come fishing? Here in the bay?" Helen asked during dessert. "You must have been about 10. Albert had so much patience teaching you how to prepare the rod." Robert smiled, a genuine expression of nostalgia. "I do remember. Dad always said that fishing taught more about patience and strategy than any business book." "He was right," Helen said softly. "Your father built this company with patience and integrity. He never took shortcuts, never compromised his values." There was a subtle shift in the air. Deborah straightened in her chair, her eyes sharpening behind the polite smile. "It's a wonderful legacy. Robert works tirelessly to honor it every day." "I'm sure he does," Helen replied, holding her daughter-in-law's gaze, "though sometimes I wonder if we're truly following the same path Albert laid out." "What do you mean by that?" Deborah's voice remained sweet, but there was an underlying hardness. Helen hesitated. It wasn't time yet. She needed to speak with Robert alone first. "Nothing much, just reflections from a sentimental old woman." After lunch, Deborah announced she would rest in the cabin. The strong sun, she claimed, was giving her a headache. Robert offered to accompany her, but she refused with a quick kiss. "Stay with your mother, she needs you." For the first time since they had embarked, Helen was alone with her son on the aft deck. The sea stretched infinitely around them, deep blue punctuated only by a few seagulls. The yacht swayed gently, the engine idling. "Robert, we need to talk," Helen began, her voice firm despite her nerves. "About important things." Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mother, if it's about the company again—" "It is about the company, yes, and about you and about us." Helen pulled up a chair, inviting him to sit. "Please, give me a few minutes, it's all I ask." He sat down, visibly uncomfortable but too polite to refuse. Helen took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You know your father and I spent 45 years building Cavendish Marine. It wasn't just a business for us, it was a dream, a legacy we wanted to leave for you, but it was also built on principles: honesty, social responsibility, fair treatment of employees." "I know that, Mother, and I try to uphold those values." "Try?" Helen leaned forward. "Robert, when was the last time you personally reviewed the contracts? When did you speak directly with the engineers on site? When did you check the numbers without relying on what other people tell you?" Robert frowned. "I trust my team. I can't micromanage everything. Trust is important, but verification is too." Helen pulled some folded documents from her bag. "Look at this. These are copies of contracts for 3 recent projects. I compared them with the actual costs of materials and labor. There are enormous discrepancies." Robert took the papers, his eyes scanning the numbers. "Where did you get these?" "Your father always kept parallel records." He believed that transparency began with meticulous documentation. Helen watched her son's face as he processed the information. "Robert, millions of dollars are disappearing. And it's not an accident or mismanagement. It's systematic." "You're suggesting there's corruption in the company?" His voice mingled incredulity with something that could be anger. "Mother, these are serious accusations." "I'm not accusing you, son. I know you're not consciously involved. But someone is. And that someone has a strong interest in keeping me away, in making me seem incapacitated so I can't ask difficult questions." "No one is trying to make you seem incapacitated." "No?" Helen pulled out another document. This is a medical report recommending my incapacitation due to senility. It was prepared by a psychiatrist who never consulted me. And do you know who requested it? Deborah. Robert's face paled. That can't be right. It's right here, in black and white. Helen felt tears threatening but forced them back. Robert, I'm not senile. I'm not confused. I'm being systematically isolated and discredited because I know too much and because I represent an obstacle to whoever wants to completely control this company. Deborah wouldn't do that. She loves our family. She loves what our family represents. Power, money, status. Helen touched her son's hand. Please, son, open your eyes. Investigate these irregularities. Talk to Dr. Marcus Ellis. He can confirm everything. Verify who is really making the decisions. Robert stood up, agitated. I can't believe you're doing this. Turning a day that should be pleasant into a session of accusations against my wife. I'm not accusing for pleasure. I'm trying to save you, save our company, save what your father built. Before Robert could reply, Deborah appeared in the doorway leading to the deck. Her face was carefully neutral, but her eyes flashed. Sorry to interrupt. I heard raised voices and got worried. Helen realized from the angle and speed that Deborah had probably been listening for some time. Her strategically timed presence was no coincidence. We were just talking, Helen said, keeping her voice calm. Deborah approached, placing a hand on Robert's arm protectively. Mother-in-law, I understand you're feeling lonely. It's natural at your age. But making accusations like this against me, against the company, isn't healthy. These aren't unfounded accusations, Helen retorted. They are documented facts. Documents can be interpreted in various ways, Deborah said softly, as if speaking to a child, especially when someone isn't familiar with the complexities of modern management. I helped build this company. Don't underestimate me. Deborah's tone changed, becoming slightly harsher. No one is underestimating you, but perhaps it's time to accept that things have changed. The business world has evolved. You deserve rest, not stress. What I deserve is respect. And the truth. The tension on the deck was palpable. Robert looked between his mother and his wife, clearly torn. Helen saw the internal struggle on his face, filial love battling against marital loyalty and incredulity. I think it's best we head back, Robert said finally, his voice tired. We all need time to cool off. Robert, please, Helen pleaded. I just ask that you investigate, it's all I ask. He didn't reply, turning to Captain Smith, who was discreetly watching from the helm. Can we return to the pier? Helen felt her heart sink. She had failed. The direct confrontation strategy hadn't worked. Deborah had managed to turn the situation around, making her seem like a paranoid old woman. The sun began to set on the horizon as the yacht turned back towards the coast. Deborah remained glued to Robert, whispering things Helen couldn't hear. She stayed alone, on the stern, looking at the passing waters. She didn't realize that Deborah was watching her with calculating eyes, already planning her next move. She didn't realize that the night would bring a twist no one could foresee. She didn't realize that sometimes, for the truth to surface, one must dive into the depths before being able to emerge again into the light. Night fell quickly over the ocean, transforming the brilliant blue into deep indigo and purple hues. The Southern Star sailed back to the continent, its lights creating a small golden halo in the growing darkness. Above, stars began to dot the sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Helen remained on the aft deck, refusing to go inside despite the cooler night air. She needed the space, the air, the solitude to process her failure. Robert had locked himself in the cabin with Deborah, and she could hear the muffled murmur of their voices through the walls. She knew her daughter-in-law was working, weaving her web of lies tighter, consolidating her influence over Helen's son. Captain Smith approached discreetly, offering a shawl. Mrs. Cavendish, it's getting cold. Perhaps it's better to go inside. Thank you, Captain. Helen accepted the shawl but didn't move. How are the sea conditions? Calm tonight. We'll reach the pier in about an hour. He hesitated. Mrs. Cavendish, if I may. I noticed things got tense. I worked with your Albert long enough to recognize when something isn't right. Helen looked at the old sailor, seeing the genuine loyalty in his eyes. Thank you for your concern, but there are things I need to resolve on my own. He nodded and moved away, returning to the helm. Helen was alone again, her thoughts swirling. Perhaps she should have been more subtle, more strategic. Perhaps she should have waited until she had even more evidence. But time was running out, and she knew it. The moves to declare her incapacitated were underway. A few more months, and it could be too late. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Deborah emerged from inside the yacht, carrying 2 glasses of red wine. She wore a light coat, and there was something in her posture that made the hairs on Helen's neck stand on end. There was a determination there, a decision made. I thought you might like some wine, Deborah said, extending one of the glasses. To calm your nerves. Helen didn't take the drink. No, thank you. Deborah shrugged, placing the refused glass on a nearby table and taking a sip from her own. The 2 women stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the waves and the engine filling the space between them. You really think you're going to win this, don't you? Deborah's voice was almost casual, but there was a coldness in it that Helen had never heard so clearly. You believe you can show up with some old documents and convince Robert that I'm the villain of the story? They're not old documents, they're proof of systematic fraud. Deborah laughed, a humorless sound. Proof? What an interesting word, as if truth matters when you control the narrative. Helen, you're an intelligent woman. How didn't you realize you were fighting a losing battle from the start? Because I don't give up on my family. Your family. Deborah turned fully to face her. Robert is no longer yours, Helen. He's mine. For 5 years I've been working on him, molding him, directing him, slowly pushing him away from you, and it worked perfectly. He loves me. He trusts me. He believes every word I say. Helen felt nausea rise in her throat. You planned all this from the beginning, since before the beginning. Deborah took another sip of wine, savoring both the drink and the confession. Do you think it was accidental that I met Robert at that conference in New York City? I researched your family for months. I learned everything about the company, about its vulnerabilities, about the opportunities. Robert was the perfect target. Recently widowed, overwhelmed with the company, starved for affection, it was like fishing with dynamite. You're monstrous. I'm practical. There's a difference. Deborah placed the empty glass on the table. And now I'm going to be practical one more time. You see, Helen, I can't let you keep causing trouble. The plans for your incapacitation were going well, but after your dramatic attempt today, it became clear that you're more persistent than I calculated. What are you saying? I'm saying that accidents happen, especially to elderly people on yachts. A moment of imbalance, a stumble, an unexpected wave. Deborah took a step towards Helen. And when you disappear, when the morning passes, Robert will need me more than ever. The company will be entirely ours. No interference, no obstacles. Helen recoiled, but Deborah was faster. Before she could scream, she felt hands pushing her forcefully. The world spun. For a fraction of a second, she saw the starry sky. Then, cold, dark water engulfed her. The shock of the impact knocked the air from her lungs. Helen sank, the ocean's darkness wrapping around her like a frigid embrace. For a moment, absolute panic. Her mind screamed, her body seized. 75 years of life hadn't prepared her to die like this. But then something ancestral awakened. Survival instinct. The swimming lessons Albert had insisted she maintain over the years. Her mind cleared with a crystalline lucidity born of desperation. Helen forced her limbs to move, fighting against the waterlogged clothes that pulled her down. She managed to reach the surface, gasping, spitting out salt water. In the distance, she saw the yacht's lights moving away. She screamed, but knew it was useless. Deborah wouldn't let the boat turn back. In the helm, Robert heard something, a muffled scream. He rushed out to the deck, finding Deborah alone, standing in the same spot where Helen had been moments before. "Where is my mother?" Deborah turned, her face perfectly composed in a mask of shock. Robert, it was terrible. She was leaning over the railing to look at the sea and suddenly lost her balance. I tried to grab her, but... Robert ran to the side of the yacht, looking into the darkness of the waters. "Mother, Captain Smith, we need to turn the boat around. My mother fell." Captain Smith appeared quickly, assessing the situation. "How long ago?" "Just seconds," Deborah lied. "No more than half a minute." The captain was already activating the controls, turning the yacht in a tight curve. Robert grabbed. Life jackets, buoys, anything that could help. His mind was in a panic. Images of his mother drowning in the darkness flooding his thoughts. "Mother," he kept shouting, "hold on, we're coming back." Meanwhile, in the cold waters, Helen fought. Her clothes weighed like anchors. The shawl Captain Smith had given her was wrapped around her arms, hindering her movements. With fingers that barely felt the cold, she managed to free herself from it. Her shoes also went, kicked into the depths. Each stroke was a battle. Her muscles burned, her lungs ached, but decades of morning swims in the mansion's pool had created a muscle memory that was now saving her. Automatic, efficient movements, keeping her afloat despite the exhaustion. In the distance, she saw the yacht's lights turning. But she also saw how far away it was, how the currents carried her away, towards the open sea. Even if they returned, finding her in the darkness would be almost impossible. "I won't give up," she whispered to herself, spitting out salt water. "I won't give her that victory." On the yacht, Robert swept the sea with a powerful spotlight. Captain Smith mentally calculated currents and drift, trying to estimate where Helen might be. But time passed. 5 minutes, 10, 15. "Robert," Deborah began softly, placing a hand on his arm. "It's too dark. It's been too long. She's elderly. The waters are cold." "No!" Robert pulled away from her abruptly. "I won't give up. I won't let my mother die here." There was something in his voice, a fierce determination Deborah had never heard. For the first time since everything began, she felt a pang of concern. Perhaps she had overestimated her control over him. Perhaps a son's love for his mother was more resilient than she had calculated. Captain Smith was already on the radio, calling the Coast Guard, reporting the disappearance. Deborah tried to interfere, suggesting they wait a little longer before alerting authorities, but Robert ignored her completely. And then, almost like a miracle, the spotlight caught something. A movement in the water about 100 yards away. "There!" shouted the auxiliary sailor. Helen saw the light approaching, felt her strength waning. A few more minutes and she wouldn't be able to continue. But there it was, salvation returning to her. She gathered her last energies and waved, shouted, did everything she could to be seen. The yacht approached carefully. Robert threw a life buoy which landed a few feet from Helen. She swam to it with her last strength, clinging to it as if it were life itself. And it was. When they pulled her aboard, Helen was trembling violently, her lips blue but alive. Robert wrapped her in blankets, took her inside, shouting for them to prepare the heated cabin. His hands trembled as he brushed the wet hair from her face. "Mother, are you okay? Are you okay?" Helen looked at her son, then at Deborah, who remained on the deck, watching, with an expression impossible to decipher. And then Helen understood something crucial. She had survived. Against all odds, against a relentless ocean, against a calculated attempt to end her. She had survived. And if she had survived this, she could survive what came next. The battle was far from over. In fact, it had just truly begun. The arrival at the pier was a whirlwind of activity. The Coast Guard was already waiting, along with an ambulance. Helen refused to go to the hospital, insisting she was fine, that she just needed rest. But Captain Smith, worried about hypothermia, convinced her to at least be examined on site by the paramedics. Deborah remained by Robert's side, the perfect image of a worried daughter-in-law. "What a terrible scare," she repeated to anyone who would listen. "It happened so fast. I tried to grab her, but I couldn't." Robert was visibly shaken, torn between the relief of having his mother alive and the trauma of almost losing her. He held Helen's hand tightly, as if fearing she might disappear again. "I'll take her home," he told the paramedics. "Our family doctor can see her there." That's when Felicity arrived, running to the pier, having been alerted by Captain Smith. Her face was pale with worry and something else, anger. because she knew, even without having seen the recordings yet, exactly what had happened. "Mrs. Cavendish, thank goodness," Felicity hugged the matriarch, whispering softly in her ear. "The cameras captured everything. Helen felt an immense relief flood her body. It wasn't just her word against Deborah's. There was evidence. Irrefutable evidence. But at that moment, exhausted and trembling, Helen just wanted to go home. The confrontation could wait. She needed to recover. She needed to think. She needed to plan her next. Move carefully. In the car back to the mansion, Robert insisted on coming along. Deborah too, of course. The tension in the vehicle was palpable. Helen pretended to sleep in the back seat, but her mind worked frantically. Deborah had tried to kill her. There was no way to sugarcoat it. Her own daughter-in-law, the woman her son loved, had tried to murder her in open waters. Upon arriving at the mansion, Felicity took charge, helping Helen change clothes, preparing hot tea, insisting she rest. Robert remained in the room, sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching his mother, with an expression Helen couldn't fully decipher. Concern, certainly, but there was something more, a doubt beginning to form. "Mother, how exactly did you fall?" His voice was soft, but the question was laden with meaning. Helen looked at her son. She could tell the truth now, denounce Deborah immediately. But something made her hesitate. She needed to do this right, with witnesses, with evidence that couldn't be questioned. If she accused Deborah now, alone in her room, it would again be her word against her daughter-in-law's. And Robert, however shaken he was still under her influence. "It was all very fast," Helen replied carefully. "One moment I was looking at the sea, the next I was in the water, the rocking of the yacht, the tiredness of the day. I can't quite explain it." Deborah appeared at the door. "Robert, darling, perhaps we should let your mother rest. It was a traumatic day for her." Something in the tone made Robert turn to his wife. There was a new hardness in his eyes. "You were there. You saw exactly what happened." "I've already told you what I saw." She leaned over the railing and lost her balance. "Funny." Robert stood up. "My mother was always extremely careful on yachts. My father taught her all the precautions. It doesn't seem like something she would do." "People get old, Robert. They become less stable." Deborah maintained a gentle tone, but Helen noticed a tension in her posture. Felicity entered the room carrying a tray with soup. "Excuse me, I need to make sure Mrs. Cavendish eats." Felicity's presence seemed to disturb Deborah. There was something in the way the caregiver looked at her, an intensity that didn't hide hostility. "Robert, let's go home. Your mother is in good hands." "No." Robert sat down again. "I'm going to spend the night here at my mother's house. You can go if you want, but I'm staying." Deborah's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing pure anger. But she quickly recomposed herself. "As you wish, darling. Then I'll stay too." That night, while Helen finally slept under the effect of a mild sedative, Felicity secretly met with Dr. Marcus Ellis in his office at the mansion. She had brought her laptop, and together they watched the recordings from the hidden cameras on the yacht. The images were crystal clear. They showed Deborah approaching Helen. They showed the conversation, the cold, calculated confession, and they showed, without any ambiguity, Deborah pushing Helen over the railing. "This is attempted murder," Marcus said, his voice trembling with indignation. "Irrefutable proof." "And we have much more," Felicity added, opening the folders with all the financial documentation. "Fraud, embezzlement, falsification of documents. Deborah Blackwood is finished." Marcus adjusted his glasses, thoughtful. "But we need to do this right. If we present the evidence incorrectly, she might have time to flee or destroy evidence. It needs to be coordinated, decisive." "I have an idea," Felicity said. "But it will require courage from Mrs. Cavendish and Robert's participation, even if he doesn't know it yet." In the following weeks, while Helen recovered from the trauma, a plan was meticulously elaborated. The recordings and documents were discreetly handed over to the competent authorities, the Attorney General's Office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. A formal investigation was opened, but kept in absolute secrecy so that Deborah wouldn't suspect. Robert, during this period, began to question things, small inconsistencies in Deborah's stories, evasive answers when he pressed for details. He began to personally review the company's contracts, something he hadn't done in years, and found exactly the discrepancies his mother had pointed out. One night, 2 weeks after the incident on the yacht, Robert appeared at the mansion without warning. Deborah was at a social event, and he knew he would have time to talk to his mother alone. "Mother, I need to know the truth." His voice was firm, but Helen saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of having his reality destroyed. What really happened on that yacht? Helen looked at her son, the man she had raised, loved, watched grow up. She decided it was time. Time to trust him completely, to give him the chance to make the right choice. "Deborah pushed me," she said simply. "It was deliberate. She confessed everything before, about having planned to approach you from the beginning, about the fraud in the company, about the plans to declare me incapacitated. And then she tried to kill me." Robert went white. No, that can't be true." Felicity entered the room, carrying the laptop. "I have the recordings if you want to see. But I need to warn you, Robert, what you're about to see will change everything." Robert looked between the two women, then at his own hands. Helen saw the exact moment he made the decision. "Show me." For the next 20 minutes, Robert watched in silence. He saw Deborah's confession. He saw the push. He saw his mother disappear into the dark waters. When the video ended, there were tears on his face. "5 years," he whispered, "5 years of lies. I'm an idiot." "You were manipulated by someone very experienced," Helen said softly. "Don't blame yourself for having a trusting heart." "But I should have seen it, I should have realized." Robert stood up, walking to the window. "What do we do now?" Felicity explained the plan. The authorities were already involved. An operation was being coordinated. But they needed Robert. They needed him to act normally, not to alert Deborah that they knew the truth, just for a few more days. "I can do that," Robert said, wiping his tears. "For what she did to my mother, for what she did to my father's company. I can pretend for as long as necessary." On the appointed day, Deborah arrived home after a company meeting. She found the house surrounded. Federal agents, prosecutors, investigators. Robert was there, but not by her side. He was next to his mother, and the expression on his face said it all. "Deborah Blackwood, you are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, falsification of documents, and embezzlement." One of the agents read her rights, while another placed handcuffs on her wrists. Deborah looked at Robert, and for the first time her mask fell completely. There was panic, anger, despair. "Robert, you can't believe this. They're lying. I love you." "You love no one but yourself," Robert replied, his voice firm despite the pain in his eyes. "And now you'll pay for everything you've done." As Deborah was led away, screaming threats and then pleas, Helen finally felt herself breathe completely. The battle wasn't entirely won yet. There would be trials, lawsuits, scars that would take time to heal. But the truth had prevailed, and her family, broken but not destroyed, had a chance to rebuild. The days following Deborah's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. The press discovered the story, and it exploded in the headlines. The heiress of the traditional Cavendish family, almost murdered by her own daughter-in-law. The attempted billion-dollar fraud. The struggle of a 75-year-old woman against corruption and greed. The entire nation was talking about Helen. But inside the Georgetown mansion, the atmosphere was more introspective. Robert had temporarily moved there, unable to return to the house he had shared with Deborah. He spent hours talking with Helen, repeatedly asking for forgiveness, trying to understand how he had been so blind. "Mother, I let her push me away from you. I let her turn our company into something Dad would never recognize. How can you forgive me?" Helen held her son's hands, seeing in him again the boy she had known, vulnerable and repentant. "Son, forgiveness isn't something you need to earn. You were deceived by someone who made an art of it. The important thing now is how we move forward." Felicity became a constant presence, not only as a caregiver, but as an advisor. Robert had discovered her true identity and was deeply ashamed to learn that she had been unjustly fired years ago. Felicity, I didn't know. At the time, I was so focused on learning the business that I didn't question the decisions of the older directors. He looked at her with sincerity. You deserve not only an apology but full restitution. It was Felicity who suggested a complete reorganization of the company. With the help of Dr. Marcus Ellis, they convened an extraordinary board meeting. Many of the current members were appointees of Deborah or Paul Saltmarsh, her cousin, who served as financial director. All were investigated, and where complicity was found, they were removed. Paul Saltmarsh tried to flee the country when he learned of Deborah's arrest, but was detained at the airport. The evidence against him was as extensive as that against his cousin. Together, they had embezzled more than $50 million over 3 years. The company was in a delicate situation. Negative publicity had affected contracts, clients hesitated, investors questioned. Robert faced a difficult choice. He could sink under the weight of the scandal or use it as a catalyst for genuine transformation. It was Helen who proposed the solution. Let's do what your father always wanted. Let's open the company. Full transparency, independent external audit, and let's reactivate the social programs that Deborah eliminated. The decision was announced at a press conference that shocked the Washingtonian business community. Robert, with Helen by his side and Felicity discreetly behind them, declared a complete reform of Cavendish Marine. He committed to compensating any client who had been harmed by the overbilling scheme. He announced the creation of an independent ethics board, and, more surprisingly, he announced that Felicity Stone would be reinstated to the company, not in her old position, but as Director of Social and Sustainability Programs. This company was built on values, Robert told the cameras, his voice firm despite the emotion. Values that were corrupted, but values that will now be restored and strengthened. My father, Albert Cavendish, always believed that a company is only as strong as the community it serves. It's time to honor that vision. Days turned into weeks. Deborah's trial concluded, resulting in a 22-year sentence for attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Her cousin, Paul Saltmarsh, received 18 years. The headlines had finally subsided, although the story occasionally resurfaced as an example of corporate corruption and belated justice. Helen attended some of the hearings, forcing herself to face the woman who had tried to kill her. Deborah, now without her polished appearance, hair without its usual treatment, simple clothes instead of designer dresses, looked like a different person. But her eyes retained that calculating coldness. During a break, Deborah managed to speak briefly, with Helen, the guards allowing a quick exchange. You think you won, she said, her voice low and venomous. But you destroyed your son in the process. He'll never trust anyone again. You ensured he'll be alone. Helen held her gaze. Better alone than beside a viper. And as for trusting, he's learning to do so again, with the right people. Back at the mansion, life began to find a new rhythm. Robert immersed himself in the work of rebuilding the company, but this time with balance. He lunched with Helen at least 3 times a week. They spent Sundays together, talking about everything from business to memories of Albert, reconnecting after years of distance. It was during one of these lunches that Robert mentioned something that caught Helen by surprise. Mother, I have news. Gabriel is coming back. Gabriel. The grandson Helen barely knew. Robert's son with his first wife, who had died of a sudden illness when the boy was only 5. Gabriel had been raised mainly by Robert and nannies until he was sent to study engineering in Europe at 18. He was now 24. He found out about everything from the news, Robert continued. He called me, and we talked for hours. For the first time in years, we really talked. He wants to come back, get to know his grandmother better, learn about the company. He wants to be part of the rebuilding. Helen felt tears well up in her eyes. I would love to get to know him better. Gabriel arrived 2 weeks later. He was tall like his father, but had his mother's gentle eyes. He hugged Helen with genuine warmth. Grandma, I'm so sorry I've been so distant. I was focused on my studies, but I was also angry. Angry. Losing my mother, angry at the world. But when I heard what you faced, how you fought, I realized that family is something we must cultivate, not abandon. Gabriel's presence brought new energy to the mansion. He constantly asked questions about the company's history. about Albert, about the projects Helen and his grandfather had developed together. He showed genuine interest, not just in the business, but in the people behind it. It was Gabriel who suggested the idea that would become Helen's most important legacy. "Grandma, you survived the ocean, literally, and you were rescued by fishermen. Have you thought about doing something to honor them, to use your story as a platform to help others?" The idea quickly germinated. Helen contacted the 3 fishermen who had rescued her that night. They were simple men, a father and 2 sons who fished for a living. She brought them to the mansion to their initial surprise and discomfort. "You saved my life," Helen said, "and I want to do more than just thank you. I want you to be part of something bigger." She presented the idea of a foundation, the Albert and Helen Cavendish Foundation, dedicated to supporting vulnerable seniors and promoting engineering education for young people from underserved communities, and the 3 fishermen would be founding partners with an active voice in the foundation's decisions. "Mrs. Cavendish, I didn't even finish high school," said the father, John Sterling, visibly moved. "Why do you want to give me this responsibility?" "Because you understand what it means to fight for survival. You understand the value of saving a life. Those perspectives are more valuable than any degree." Helen smiled. "And besides, you'll have qualified people to help you. The important thing is that your voice, the voice of someone who truly knows the difficulties, is heard." News of the foundation and the fishermen's participation went viral. The press loved the story. The public was moved. Donations began pouring in from across the nation. Cavendish Marine committed 10% of its annual profits to the foundation, a number Robert announced with pride. "My father always said that success without purpose is empty," he declared in an interview. "This foundation is that purpose." Felicity, in her new role, worked tirelessly to structure the programs. She established partnerships with universities for scholarships. She created support centers for seniors in vulnerable neighborhoods. She developed mentorship, programs where experienced engineers guided young talents. One afternoon, as Helen reviewed foundation projects in her office, Robert entered carrying an old box. "Mother, I found this in Dad's office safe at the company. I think you should see it." Inside were letters. Dozens of letters Albert had written to Helen over the years but never delivered. They were reflections on his fears, hopes, dreams for the company and for the family. And in several of them, he expressed concern about the future, about how to protect the legacy they were building. In one of the last letters, dated just a week before he passed, Albert wrote something that made Helen cry. "If anything happens to me, I know Helen will take care of everything. She is stronger than she thinks, wiser than she appears. And when the difficult moment comes, and it always does, I trust that she will do what is right, even if it seems impossible." "He knew," Helen whispered. "He knew I would have to fight." "And you fought," Robert said, sitting beside her. "And you won. Dad would be so proud." Mother, son, and grandson sat together that afternoon, reading the letters of a man who was no longer there, but whose spirit permeated everything they did. And for the first time in years, Helen felt that her family was truly complete. 6 months had passed since that dramatic night on the Southern Star. Deborah Blackwood's trial had come to an end, resulting in a 22-year sentence for attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Her cousin Paul Saltmarsh received 18 years. The headlines had finally diminished, although the story occasionally resurfaced as an example of corporate corruption and delayed justice. Helen was in her garden on a sunny April morning, observing the final preparations for an event that would mark a new era for the Cavendish family. The foundation would hold its official inauguration with the presence of authorities, business leaders, representatives from underserved communities, and, most importantly, the beneficiaries of the first programs. Felicity approached carrying a clipboard. "Mrs. Cavendish, everything is ready. The auditorium holds 500 people and is packed. The young people who will receive the first scholarships are very nervous and excited." Helen smiled. "Nervous and excited. Exactly how I feel. You should just be excited. Today is a day of pure celebration." But Helen knew it wasn't that simple. Celebration, yes, but also reflection. The past months had been a journey of healing, but the scars remained. Robert was still in therapy, working through the betrayal and manipulation he had suffered. He dated occasionally, but kept people at a cautious distance, his heart still rebuilding the walls Deborah had destroyed. Gabriel had become an integral part of the company, working directly with Felicity on the Foundation's projects. The young man had a natural talent for engineering, but also possessed a rare empathy, something that made him perfect for the line of work he had chosen. "Grandma," Gabriel called, running through the garden. "I just got a call. The Navy approved our proposal for the training program. We'll be able to offer technical training to 100 young people a year." Helen hugged her grandson, feeling pride flood her chest. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you." The event began at noon. The Foundation's auditorium, built on land donated by Cavendish Marine in a central area of Washington, D.C., was indeed packed. Helen went on stage accompanied by Robert, Gabriel, Felicity, Dr. Marcus Ellis, and the 3 fishermen, who had become such an important part of her story. But before the formal speeches, there was a surprise that even Helen didn't expect. Robert asked to speak for a personal statement. "I want to start by apologizing," he said, his voice amplified by the loudspeakers. "Apologies to my father, who is no longer here to hear, for having allowed his legacy to be corrupted. Apologies to my mother for years of distance and for not seeing her when she needed it most. And apologies to everyone who was harmed by the criminal actions that occurred under my negligent administration." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Robert took a deep breath before continuing. "My mother almost lost her life defending the values on which this company was founded. She faced betrayal, isolation, and a literal ocean. And yet, when it all ended, instead of seeking revenge or growing bitter, she created this, a foundation to help others, to educate young people, to support vulnerable seniors, to transform tragedy into hope." He turned to Helen, tears streaming freely down his face. "Mother, you didn't just save our company, you saved our family. You saved me. Today, before everyone here, I promise to honor Dad's legacy, honor your strength, and ensure that Cavendish Marine is always a force for good in the world. I promise to be the son you deserve." Helen stood up, embracing Robert as the auditorium erupted in applause. Mother and son remained embraced for long moments, and in that embrace was forgiveness, reconciliation, and the promise of a better future. When it was finally her turn to speak, Helen approached the microphone with legs that trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion. "I had a speech prepared," she began, her voice clear. "But I think I'll speak from the heart. 6 months ago, I was in the water, in the dark, thinking I would die alone in the ocean. I was 75 years old, I was tired, and the current was strong. It would have been so easy to give up." She paused, looking at the hundreds of faces turned toward her. "But I didn't give up. Not because I'm particularly brave or strong. I didn't give up because I remembered everything I had lived for. The love Albert and I shared, the son we raised, the dreams we built together. And I realized that giving in would be betraying all of that." Helen looked at John Sterling and his sons. "And then 3 angels appeared, humble fishermen who didn't know me, who owed me nothing, but who saved me anyway. They reminded me that kindness still exists, that good people still care. Everyone in this room has faced or will face their own oceans, moments when it seems impossible to continue, moments when darkness seems to win. This foundation exists to be the light in those moments, to be the outstretched hand, to be the voice that says, 'Don't give up.'" The applause came, but Helen gently raised her hand to continue. "There's something else I want to share. Something few know." She looked at Felicity, who nodded encouragingly. "The woman standing beside me is Felicity Stone. Many know her as my caregiver, as the Foundation's Director of Social Programs. But years ago, she was a brilliant engineer at Cavendish Marine, an engineer who was unjustly fired for doing exactly what was right, for reporting irregularities." The auditorium fell silent again, people processing this revelation. Helen continued. "Felicity could have been bitter. She could have turned her back on us, but instead, when she saw that I needed help, she came. She risked herself to protect me. She fought by my side. And when it was all over, instead of asking for revenge, she asked for the chance to rebuild, to make a difference. Helen turned to Felicity. That's why today I announce that Felicity Stone will not only be Director of Social Programs, she will be my successor as President of the Foundation's board, because leadership is not about power, it's about integrity, and I know no one with more integrity than her. Felicity was visibly shocked, tears streaming down her face. Helen hugged her as the auditorium rose in a standing ovation. "I never imagined," Felicity whispered. "I never imagined it would all lead to this." "Life has mysterious ways of guiding us," Helen replied. "You were sent to save me. Now you will help save many others." The rest of the event was a celebration. 20 young people from underserved communities received full scholarships to study engineering. 15 vulnerable seniors received housing and medical support. Stories were shared, tears were shed, hopes were renewed. During the cocktail hour after the formalities, Helen found herself in a quiet corner of the garden with Dr. Marcus Ellis. The old lawyer smiled, but there was melancholy in his eyes. "Albert would be so proud," he said, "of you, of Robert, of all this." "I miss him every day," Helen admitted, "but I feel he's here somehow, in every decision we make, in every life we touch." "He is." Marcus placed his hand over hers. "And Helen, if I may say so, you have honored his memory in a way that goes far beyond companies and foundations. You showed Robert what truly matters. That is the greatest legacy of all." That night, when everyone had left and the mansion was silent again, Helen sat on the veranda overlooking Chesapeake Bay. The city lights twinkled like earthly stars, and in the distance she could see the silhouette of the Southern Star anchored at the company pier. Robert joined her, followed by Gabriel. The three stood in silence for a while, simply appreciating the view, the company, the moment. "Mother," Robert said eventually, "thank you for not giving up. On me, on us, on everything." Helen held her son's hand on one side and Gabriel's on the other. "Family isn't something you give up on, son. Family is something you fight for, every day in every way." "And Dad? Did he give up?" Gabriel's question was soft but laden with old hurt. Robert turned to his son. "I pulled away when your mother passed. I let the pain turn me into someone distant. And then I let Deborah complete that isolation. But no, Gabriel, I never gave up on you. I just got lost for a while, and your grandmother helped me find myself again. So we're all learning," Gabriel observed, smiling slightly. "You're learning to open up, I'm learning to forgive, and Grandma is teaching us both what it truly means to be strong." Helen looked at her grandson, then at her son, and felt a profound peace. The journey had not been easy. There had been betrayal, pain, moments when everything seemed lost, but from that rock bottom, they had built something new, something stronger, because it had been tested. "You know," Helen said, breaking the contemplative silence, "your grandfather used to say that ships are not built to be safe in port. They are built to face the sea, the storms, the challenges. We are like ships. We were not made for easy, protected lives. We were made to face the waves and still move forward." "Well," Robert toasted with his glass of water, "then we are the most tested ships on the ocean." "And yet," Gabriel added, "still sailing." The three laughed, and in that laughter was healing, hope, and the promise of better days. Chesapeake Bay stretched before them, the same waters that had almost taken Helen, now serene and beautiful under the full moon. Months turned into years. The Albert and Helen Cavendish Foundation became a national reference in social and educational programs. Cavendish Marine not only recovered its reputation, but surpassed it, being recognized as a model of business ethics. Robert married again, this time to a literature professor he met through the Foundation's programs, a kind and transparent woman Helen adored from the first moment. Gabriel graduated with honors and took a leadership position in the company, bringing innovative ideas about marine sustainability. And Helen, at 80, remained active, participating in board meetings, advising young entrepreneurs, and serving as a living example that age does not define capability. One Sunday morning, 5 years after that fateful day at sea, Helen was again in her garden when she received a letter. It was from Deborah, from prison. She hesitated before opening it, but curiosity overcame caution. The letter was surprisingly brief and free of bitterness. Deborah wrote about mandatory therapy, about slowly beginning to understand the roots of her greed and manipulation, about genuine regret, though too late. And it ended with a single line that surprised Helen. "You defeated me, but in the process you saved Robert from something far worse than prison. You saved him from becoming like me. For that, strangely, I am grateful." Helen folded the letter carefully. She would not reply. There was no need. That chapter was closed, but she kept the letter, a reminder that even villains have their journeys, their times of reflection. Felicity found her shortly after. "Letters from the past?" she asked, sitting beside her. "Ghosts that are finally at peace," Helen replied. "Felicity, have you ever thought about how everything connected? You being fired, coming back as my caregiver, everything that followed?" "I think about it every day. Sometimes what seems like the end is just a redirection to where we were truly meant to be." Deep philosophy for a Sunday morning. The two women smiled, their friendship as strong as blood ties. They had faced storms together and emerged not just survivors but victorious. That night the family gathered for Sunday dinner, a re-established tradition. Robert and his wife, Clara. Gabriel and his girlfriend, a young engineer he had met through the foundation. Felicity, long considered part of the family. Dr. Marcus Ellis, now retired but still present at important moments, and in the place of honor among them all, Helen. Before dinner, Robert raised his glass. "To Mother, the strongest, wisest, and most extraordinary woman I know, who taught us that family is not just blood but choice, who showed us that true strength is not in never falling but in always getting up. To Helen," everyone echoed, glasses raised. Helen looked around the table at the faces she loved, at the family she had fought so hard to preserve and rebuild. She thought of Albert, feeling his presence as she always did in important moments. She thought of the journey she had traveled, the dark waters she had faced, the light she had found on the other side. And she smiled, because finally, completely, she was home. Dear listeners, Helen Cavendish's story teaches us that strength has no age, that truth always finds its way, and that family is worth every battle. If this journey touched your heart, we have many other stories waiting for you in our special playlist. You can find it right here. Each narrative explores the complexity of human relationships, the challenges we face, and the resilience we discover when we need it most. If Helen's courage inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Your comments are what motivate us to keep bringing these stories every day. Tell us in the comments which moment of the story moved you the most. Has your mother, your grandmother, or someone you know shown a similar strength to Helen's? We want to hear your stories too. Until the next journey, and remember, just as Helen taught us, it's never too late to fight for what's right. It's never too late to rebuild what was broken, and never, never too late to come home.